Welcome to Digital Exposure TV. Today I'm going to show you how to create depth of field in Blender. Okay, so let's get started. If you don't know what depth of field is, I will give you a quick explanation. Depth of field is when you use a camera lens to create a blurry background, like this tree's blurry in the background here, and you've got this plant in the foreground that's nice and clear. And anything that would be in the foreground of this plant would be blurry as well. Basically, to put it as simply as possible, you have a certain area that is in focus and everything around it is out of focus. Now, that area that's in focus is called the focal point, which is where this plant is right now. Now, we could move the focal point so that in the background this tree is in focus and everything else is out of focus, including this plant in the foreground. So that's your basics of depth of field. I won't go too far into it because I'm going to do a video on photography and how depth of field works and lighting and f-stops and all that kind of thing later on. So let's close this up, get into Blender. Right, first thing you need to do is I'm just going to show you how to set up a basic scene so that you can try out depth of field and get used to it, and then obviously you can use it on your own projects. So we click on the sun, the lamp even, and then I'm going to go over to the lamp tab. I keep saying sun because I'm going to change it to a sun now. That's what I want you to do, is click on the sun so that there's enough light. Okay, and we're going to set up a basic scene. I just want to delete this cube, and then I'll go to add mesh, and I'm going to add a iconosphere, just because it has various different edges and it's something that you can measurably see depth of field with. So then I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to hold down Shift and D, and duplicate again, Shift and D, and we're going to have 3 iconospheres. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one close to the camera, one that we're going to focus on, and then one really far away from the camera. So that way you can actually see the depth of field and that blurriness that I was talking about. And don't worry if you didn't understand or it wasn't very clear about how depth of field works, because you'll be able to see it in a moment, and hopefully that'll make it easier for you. Okay, let's just jump into the camera here. Okay, so obviously the camera needs to zoom out more than that. Okay, so let's click on the camera, we'll move it over here. I know there's quicker and easier ways to move the camera. This is just my preferred method, using a trackpad. So, okay, let's move the camera up, and I'm going to have my scene there. I'm going to have this much closer. Let's move that up a bit and out. Oh, I just need to jump out for a second and take a look. I want to get this really close to the camera but still in shot, so let's have a look at that. That's better. Let's jump up there. Bum, bum, ba-dum. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so we want this one in the middle to be in focus. So we'll have that there. And then I want this one here to be way off into the background, and I'll enlarge that actually, just so it's in the background but you can see it better. I think I should enlarge them all really, just make it a bit more clearer for you. There we go, so we've got our basic scene there. I will put that one in the background a little further away just to illustrate it a bit better. Oh god, almost hyperdrive kind of jumped away from that then. Right, okay, so there you go, there's our scene. And now we need to change the camera. So this is what I was explaining before. These are your camera options, and you've got your focal length, which is set to 35. That's 35 millimeters in a camera lens. 35 millimeters is best described as the depth of field your eye uses. So if you hold up your finger in front of you now, I know it sounds silly, but just try it. Hold your finger up in front of you, look at your finger intently, and you'll see that it's very sharp, and all the stuff in the peripheral vision in the background is very blurry. Now a 35mm lens has the exact same amount of blurriness in the background, so it's the closest thing to the human eye. So most films, when you see a shot of a person talking or something, will be a 35mm lens. So we're recreating that here where it says focal length, and then the sensor size is just an artificial sensor, and then you've got your camera presets, and you can have all sorts of cameras there. So if you're creating footage to go with a camera that you've shot footage on, like a Nikon D3100 or a Canon 550D, anything like that, you can match it there. Then you've got your focus. Now this is the important bit. Now if we go down to limits, see this little checkbox here? That's the most important thing. You need to click on limits for this to work. So if I zoom out now, and you see my camera has this little cross on it there. That cross will indicate where your focal point is. So see where it says distance? I can drag that out. So I want this thing in the middle, our iconosphere, to be the focal point. So I'll put the cross inside the iconosphere. Now imagine that anywhere that cross is going to be in focus. So if I pull this back, this area will be in focus. Everything in the front will be blurry. Everything behind will be blurry. But we want this point where the iconosphere is to be in focus, and we want everything in front of it to be blurry and everything behind it to be blurry. So you can do it that way using distance, or you can pick one of your objects that you want the camera to follow. So if I click this iconosphere, the one we want to follow, if I press N, bring up my menu there, it says iconosphere 0.001. I'm going to change its name to Harvey. Okay, so it's now called Harvey. And if I just get rid of that menu, go back into my camera menu, click on my camera, you can see instead of where it says focus, instead of having distance, so I can still move that around, I'm going to take that away and I'm going to click on Harvey. It has a list of every object in your scene, and Harvey's the one we want to follow. So the X is now inside that iconosphere. So we know that the camera is going to follow that no matter where we put the camera, no matter how much Harvey moves around, it will follow him. So there you go. That's the easiest way to do it. If you want to pull focus so that in the middle of a scene, let's say if we go down to our timeline on 0, and that's the beginning of the scene. And at the beginning of the scene, we want to say have the focus on the iconosphere in the background. Okay, so let's just have a look at that. Let's get that just right. So the distance in the background is about there. Okay, so I'm going to click I'm just going to hover over this box where it says distance, and I'm going to click I. That will turn it yellow and give it a keyframe. So then about 50 frames later, we want it, actually we'll do it a bit further, we'll go 70 frames later on the timeline, make sure it's clicked into the timeline in the position you want. We want the distance to be this iconosphere in the middle. So then you click I again, and it'll turn from green to yellow on that particular part on the timeline. And if you look in the timeline, when you click your camera, you can see these little yellow lines, and they indicate where you've clicked that to change. So now if we actually look up here, you can see as time goes by, the cross moves. That's your focal point moving. So you're going from the beginning, and I'll just press play on it. You're from the beginning to the end, changing where your focal point is. So you start off with the background in focus, and it moves, and then it stops, and now this iconosphere in the middle, Harvey, is in focus. Okay, so to get rid of these, this is something you want to play around with. I'm not going to do it today. I'm just going to show you the basics of it, but you can play around with that if you like. So to get rid of that, you just highlight the point in time on the timeline, go over to distance, highlight it again. Instead of pressing I again, you press Alt I. That will take it away, and we'll go back to the beginning where there's another one there, and that's turned yellow. So we'll go Alt I, and we'll get rid of those, and we're going to set Harvey as our focal point. So the distance disappears there. You're not allowed to use it once you've set a specific object as the focal point. So set Harvey now. We'll go into camera mode, And now it's time to add our nodes. So I'll bring this up here. And if you don't know this, on the bottom of each screen, we've got two screens available at the moment, the top one and the bottom. On the bottom left of each screen, there's this little box, and you can change all the views. So I can go to the timeline on the top there, or I can have it in 3D view, which is what we're going to have it in. On the bottom, I'm going to go to Node Editor. And once you've got your Node Editor up, if you've never used nodes before, don't be scared. They're dead simple. It does look very confusing if you see someone use tons of nodes, but we're only going to use 4. And that's all you need for depth of field. So before I use depth of field and nodes, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a render. So go over to the render tab, and I'll just put it on 100% quality, and I'll just click render. And there we've got our scene rendered. Okay, so all I need to do now is go back into my node editor, and you can see these 3 symbols on the bottom left, and they represent your whole scene, which is the one on the left. The one in the middle is then your texture, and then the one on the right is your material. And we're going to use the whole scene at the moment. Then we're going to click on Use Nodes, this little box next to it, and then we're going to click Backdrop. Now the backdrop won't show up for a minute, but what it will do is that image we've just rendered, it'll stick it in the background so you can see it. So you start off with 2 nodes. You've got your render layers, which you always start off with. That basically tells you everything that's in the scene. Then you've got your composite, which is basically your output. When everything's put together, your composite puts it out as a finished product. And then you go over to Add, and we go over to Filters and Defocus. Now your defocus filter is basically, I'll stick it there. Your defocus filter is basically your depth of field. That is it. That is your controls for your depth of field. You don't need anything else. Make sure you've got image connecting to image and Z connecting to Z. Now click Use Z Buffer, turn the preview off, and then we're going to go to Add, and we want to add Output Viewer. Now we'll stick the viewer down here. It's just so that we can see what we're doing. It doesn't have any bearing. It won't change anything. So if we use the image from the defocus down to the image on the viewer, and there you go. Now you can see our rendered image in the background. And what we want to do is, what I prefer to do is where you've got your top screen, I prefer to press the render. Oh, hang on. I'll just hold something over and then click. No, it doesn't seem to want to render in that screen right now. I've probably just pressed something wrong. That's all right. Don't worry about it. I can just go back over to Node Editor, and there we go. I usually use that so that I can scale it properly on the top, but we'll just use this for now. So what we need to do is we need to change the depth of field, because at the moment it's kind of shallow. It's not shallow, it's really wide. There's no blurriness. So for a start, all we're going to do is change the f-stop, which is this top line here. And these usually correspond to f-stops on a camera, if you know what those are. And they're not very the same or accurate, depending on all the settings, really. So we'll go down to 28, see if that does anything. No, you can see this left iconosphere has gone a little bit blurry. So if we go to, say, f-stop 7. You can see it's loading there. There we go, that's a bit of a better view. So if I then go down to, say, f3, and this is just like on a normal camera. We'll go down to f2, I think. Oh, no, that's a bit too little. There we go. Okay, so basically you get it. These are your controls. Your f-stop is your main control. If you start playing around with the maximum blur and the threshold, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to get the f-stops right. I would just leave them on your basic threshold and maximum blur and just change the f-stops and nothing else. So now if I go to render, let's have a click on this camera, see if it renders it up at the top. No, it's not rendered at the top, but there's your basic render. And then in a second, it will load the depth of field. There you go. So now you can see that our iconosphere in the center, which is what we picked in our camera settings as Harvey, we named it Harvey, that is in focus. and anything in the foreground, this iconosphere is blurry, and anything in the background, this iconosphere here, is blurry. And then on top of that, if I just click back on my node editor, you can change it to make it as blurry or as less blurry as you like, which is more blurry is a shallow depth of field and less blurry is a wide depth of field. Let's make it really blurry. We'll put it on like F1 or just below. And there we go. Let's render that so I can see a full render. So there you go again, it's rendered your image, and now you wait for it to load up at the top here. This little bar adds your nodes onto it. And there you go, really blurry background, really blurry foreground, and you've got your object in focus at the front there. So there you go, that's depth of field, that's it. Your scene can be whatever you want it to be. You can add the keyframes so that the depth of field moves. If you've got a moving character and you just want to track it, you don't want to be complicated, you can just name the character by clicking on it, press N, and then name it in the little box down here, which is where I've put Harvey. And then you can go to your camera settings and again click on what you want it to be, and I clicked Harvey, and Harvey will be your focal point. So there you go, that's how easy it is to do depth of field. You just click on what you want to be in the depth, add the 4 nodes. If I go back to my node editor just to recap, add those 4 nodes. You've got your render layer. Actually, I'll take the viewer off just so you can see them properly. There you go. So you've got your render layer, your defocus, your viewer, and your composite. And to add any nodes, you just go to add, and then there's a big list of them there that you can click on. So that's it. That's depth of field in Blender. Hopefully that's really helped you and made it simple for you. If it has, please give us a little thumbs up, because I like to know if it's actually helped somebody out. Leave your comments if there's anything you want to know or anything I can help you with. And please subscribe, because there is lots more videos to come. Thank you very much for watching Digital Exposure TV, and stay classy, San Diego.